Hello, and I am back in my reading nook, and I'm quite happy about that. I loved my road trip, but trying to film book reviews from the car or outside was a trial that I hadn't expected. So what I've got today is Emperor of Thorns by Mark Lawrence, which I completed. I'd already started it when I started to drive up to Cairns, but I listened to it. It was an audiobook. I listened to it all the way up and part of the way back. So yes, I didn't actually lean the book on the steering wheel and drive while trying to navigate the truly awful Bruce Highway that leads up the coast. Queensland Police Service frown on that sort of behaviour, and they tend to follow those frowns with fines and lack of points. So instead I got to listen to the wonderful narration by Joe Jameson. I cannot imagine anyone, not even the little voice inside my head, doing this book better than he did. So somehow I'd never encountered Mark Lawrence before. If you're the person who recommended him to me and you're watching this, thank you from the depths of my heart. The Broken Empire was a marvellous trilogy. It's kind of restored my faith in epic fantasy, because I haven't read a lot of modern epic fantasy that I thought stood anywhere near this. And according to the first book, it's the 10th anniversary, so it's been out there for 10 years and I didn't know. But now I know, and I'm happy. I thought Emperor was an excellent culmination to the series. I was delighted to find that King of Thorns had no second book slump at all that I could tell, but I was also a little bit almost hesitant about how this could possibly end. Obviously, Jorg would become Emperor. We couldn't have followed him for this long and not. But how would that play out? How could you possibly end such a series? And I felt it needed an end. It had a perfect one. I cannot emphasize enough that the ending to Emperor was everything that I expected, and I am certainly not going to spoil it, because anyone who hasn't read this and likes epic fantasy, I feel should, and enjoy it for themselves. Okay, but where we start? We start with King Jorg, originally of Ancraft, now of Raynar. He is now 20, and he is the king of 7 nations by conquest. Jorg is the character that makes this book, and as ever, he is immoral, he is violent, he is a selfish protagonist, he is an unlikable protagonist in the very essence of what that means, but at the same time, he is strangely charming in a way. And astoundingly, he has grown throughout the series. I didn't really see how, coming from Prince of Thorns, you could grow this character, but he does. So, if not, yeah, he grows and he matures. I'd say he definitely matures. He's never quite a likable character because of what he innately is. But at the same time, he is always complex, he is always interesting, intelligent, and at the very essence, he is always a surprising character, both to us as readers and to the people he shares his world with. One of his greatest attractions as a character and as a ruler and as a leader is his capacity to do the unexpected, to think the unthinkable and then carry through on it with never hesitation. So that makes him really, really interesting. And as he's described within the book, not by the author so much as by events, he appears to have an impressive amount of charm, an immense drive, and a self-assurance that as he grows never changes and which sweeps people along in his wake. So I think one of the things about Jorg that I found as a character and a protagonist really excellent was his complete transparency with himself. He does horrible things throughout this series. When he is young and he's a road brother, he does horrible things because that's what road brothers do, and that's how he's surviving, but also he does them for no reason, just because. When he grows, and in the second book, he does horrific things again and again, and new ones each time. And he does them for reasons of conquest. So for us as 2024 readers, this may not be necessarily excusable, but in his Broken Empire, in terms of conquest, some of the things he does are comprehensible, if not actually likable. Some of the times they're even laudable. And in the third book, He is a king attempting to be emperor. And he still does horrible things, though different horrible things once again, but within a context completely acceptable to his society. So, in the first book, the terrible things that he does are things that probably his road brothers and other people who would do such things would excuse as, oh, I had no chance, that's my life, whatever. He never makes any excuses for them. And that is really quite delightful. The complete and utter intelligent amoralness, I suppose, of Prince of Thorns was one of the things that really got me into this series. So you do have some personal growth, and he has personal growth. He no longer doesn't do cruel things for the fun of it, which many kings in this type of world would. Not York. He tends to be outcome focused, and one of his wonderful characteristics is that his complete focus on what he wants and where he's going, and the fact, however he achieves that, is okay by him. In King, I think we've seen significant personal development, if only because some of the horrible things he's doing are starting to creep out of his head and out of the copper box and infect his reality. So, throughout all this series, we've got a situation where part of it is in the now and part of it is in the 4 or 5 years ago. I don't remember if it was 4 or 5. And he does this through, and Mark Lawrence does this throughout the series. I normally don't like jumping around in time. In this series, I can't think of a better way of doing it, to be honest. We don't start with Jorg as a 10-year-old. We start with him as a teenager already on the road, thinking back to the 10-year-old Emperor of Thorns. He's now over 20. Is he 25? I think his goal was to be Emperor before 25, and I think he just made it. And we're filling in the backdrop of things that happen in this timeline through thinking back. And I've never met anyone, I think, who did it quite as well as Mark Lawrence has done it here. There was another thing I was going to say about Jorg and his overall character, but I've forgotten it. Never mind. So, in terms of writing, these are the first books I've read by Mark Lawrence. He has the most wonderful combination of writing vivid details and visual descriptions. So there's one phase that happens in a cemetery, and I swear that by the time he's described it in, I don't know, probably just a few sentences, maybe a paragraph, but with Joe Jameson's wonderful intonation narrating it, you could be standing there. It's just amazing. So vivid detail, vivid description, and he throws some really ugly scenes and uglinesses in there. And in Emperor of Thrones, a few scenes that you were suspecting had probably happened are brought forth. So yes, trigger for rape and sexual abuse. But anyone who's reading this trilogy, I think, needs to have a pretty low bar on triggers, because a lot of what could trigger someone is going to be here in one of these books. So ugly scenes thrown in with the vivid detail and visual description. There's a certain brutal honesty to everything that happens that comes out of Jorg's character. So this brutal honesty that he has, and Jorg is our reflection on humanity in this post-apocalyptic world. So every sentence that brings Jorg and the world into your head seems carefully crafted, and it's a pleasure to read as well, or listen to in my case. So kudos to Mark Lawrence for that. Jorg and his reflection. I said earlier that he's got a brutal honesty about everything he does, and he does. And that's one of the things that makes him a really enjoyable character to read. The only thing in which he doesn't quite have this same brutal honesty is in his view of himself. He thinks of himself as a coward for having failed to save his mother and younger brother way back before the first book happened. And a few other things. It's interesting to have such an incredibly focused character still have that self-doubt that so many of us actually do have. So that was fascinating. So in Emperor, we have more of the post-apocalyptic landscape. And as with all the books on the narrative, the hovering back and forth, in time allows us to see more of the post-nuclear world and the societies that arose after and the places left behind from the nuclear devastation. In this book, or rather 4 to 5 years before this book's now, as it were, Jorg went travelling a little bit in the world. So he goes up into the north part, where I'm feeling some Viking influence creeping into the description there, but not too much, and there's no helmets with horns, thankfully. And he travels all the way down. Now, these travels made me overthink things too much. So this is a post-apocalyptic landscape. At some point, it's made clear to us that, as well as all the nuclear devastation that must have occurred, the coastlines have changed. We get a hint that Great Britain is now a series of islands, and that really confused me because I was about 99% certain that Jorg's territory of Ravna was in Scotland in the Highlands. Or is that Joe Jameson's accent? I don't know. I kept trying to figure out where we were, and aside from one brief period where he travels down to Africa, and it was obviously Africa and it couldn't be anything else, aside from that, I've got no idea where this was situated. I'm sure there's websites out there dedicated to whether Spain has those horrible nuclear wastelands or not, but I couldn't tell. It did make me think. Okay, another thing that this book does, expands upon, if you will, from other books, is the notion of powers behind the thrones. And I don't want to spoiler this book. I don't want to say anything that will mean that the next person who reads it, having seen this video, isn't going to get the same experience that I did, which was a spectacular experience, and would not have been enhanced, I feel, by knowing more about what happens. So bear with me. Throughout this trilogy, you've got this notion of powers behind the throne, and that gives an increased level of opponency for Jorg to struggle against. He isn't just struggling against kings, he's struggling by magic that backs these kings. So in the very first one, he's got what appears to be an Arab dream sorcerer. Later there's another dream sorcerer. In Emperor of Thorns, we have the character of Catherine Abscoran, who Jorg is kind of obsessed with throughout, who has decided through strength of her own will to become a dream sorcerer, and she does that. I really liked what Mark Lawrence did with Catherine Abscoran. So we've got this theory of magic behind the throne all the way through here. But around about the end of here, but throughout the Emperor of Thorns, we start to see that there's a second power behind the thrones. We get an explanation for how magic is suddenly appeared in a post-apocalyptic world. I'm not saying it's the best or most convincing magic explanation I've ever seen, but we see how it comes into being, and we get a hint of how it can be brought out of being and how it's ripping the world apart. So that was interesting. I enjoyed that. There's also an element of powers behind the thrones in terms of remnant populations from the information age. Are they AIs? Are they computers? We never know. They're present, but never very in your face. So you've got all these extra factors to what is essentially a medieval world. So you've got the swords and sorcery, mostly swords, teeny tiny bit of sorcery. But then you've got this added dimension of post-apocalyptic and computer forces maybe fighting over the world. It is a marvelous trilogy. Thank you to whoever recommended Mark Lawrence to me. I can't remember who it was. If you're watching this, I'm incredibly grateful. I'm not going to go straight on to another Mark Lawrence books. I think that would be almost defeatist, because I enjoyed this one as itself so much. I'm going to give it a rest. I'm going to read a few other things, and then in time I will go out there and I will find more Mark Lawrence. If you are fond of the genre, if you think this was a great first series to read, by all means recommend to me your favourite Mark Lawrences, and I will look at them in the future. Thank you for watching, and read good books. And if you haven't, read these good books, because they are absolutely spectacular in my personal opinion. Bye.